Hello guys, today we discuss the topic of fancy and imagination is most important question 7 Taylor Coleridge. The biographical trivia is not a biography discourse by Samuel Taylor Coleridge which he published in 1870. It was one of the Coleridge's main critical study. Most important line, the creative endowment fancy derived from the Greek word fantasia and imagination from the Latin imagination have received various meanings in different literary periods. In 18th century literary theory, imagination and fancy were regarded as a mode of memory. Coleridge declared that fancy and imagination are two names with one meaning, or the lower and higher degree of the same power but are distinct with a different quality. In chapter 13 of biographical Coleridge introduced the distinction between two kinds of imagination, primary and secondary. Fancy and Imagination, published in 1870. Fancy derived from Greek word fantasia and imagination from the Latin imagination. Two kinds of imagination, primary imagination and secondary imagination. Primary imagination is universal and secondary imagination is God-given quality. Imagination. Imagination in its real sense denotes the working of poet mind upon external object or object visible to the eye. The imagination process something add additional property. To add object or something abstract from it some of its property. Therefore, imagination thus informs the object into something new. It modifies and even creates new object. Imagination is the ability of mind to create, is the ability of shape and unite different ideas, something is new. Different idea, image and symbol to create something new. Primary imagination, it is the quality by which we perceive the world around us. It is merely the power of the receiving impression of the extremely through our sense. It perceives objects both in their parts and as a whole. It is an involuntary act of the mind, the human mind, to receive impression and sensation from the outside world. Unconsciously and involuntarily, it imposes some sort of order on those impressions and reduce them to size and shape so that the mind can form a clear image of the outside world. It is in this way that clear and coherent perception become possible. Coleridge described primary imagination is the mysteriously power which can extract hidden idea and meaning from objective idea. From objective data. Secondary imagination. Secondary imagination do not exist in everyone by birth. It is a God-given quality. The primary imagination is universal and possessed by all. The secondary imagination make artist creation possible. It works upon what perceived by the primary imagination. Its raw material are the sensitivity sensations and impressions supplied to it by the primary imagination. It selects and orders the raw material and reshape and remodels them into objects of beauty. It is implastic and remodel them into objects of beauty. It is in simplistic and dissolved difficult and displayed to create the secondary imagination is at root of all poetic activity. It is primarily the reveal itself in the balance or reconciliation of opposite and discordant quality and college call. It's a magical synthetical power. It fuses the various quality of the soul, subjective with the objective, the human mind with external nature, and the spiritual with the physical or material. The primary and secondary imagination do not differ from each other in kind. Their difference is one of degree. The secondary imagination is more active, more conscious, and more than the primary imagination. Fancy imagination and fancy differ in kind and nature, whereas imagination is creative, fancy, which is the common possession of man, is not creative. It is a mechanical process that receives the elementary image, which comes to its ready made and without altering these fancy reasonable them into a different order from that in those fancy which it is was received. It is only combined what it perceived into which it was perceived. It is only combined what it perceived into which beautiful shape but does not faces or unify. It is a kind of memory, beautiful shape that arbitrarily bring together image. And even when brought together, these images contain to retain their separate and individual property, they receiving no coloring and modification from the mind. Coleridge has called fancy aggregative and associative power. However, Wordsworth argued that to aggregate and to the associate, to evoke and to combine belong as well to imagination as to the fancy, but Colby explained that aggressions or collection is beneath the dignity of imagination because it is not necessarily an act of uniting. The material have to be assembled before imagination can get to work and make the transformation and synthesis. Fancy has to do this act of collecting and so fancy perseveres imagination. According to Aristotle, the function of the fancy is not to create or generate, it is just a form of memory or storehouse. Data collect do not change, see thing. There is no transmission. It is not create power of all, it does not possess and unify. The disconnection between fancy and imagination. conclude, Coleridge has made an intellectual interruption of fancy and imagination. Coleridge owed his interest in the study of the theory of the imagination. He is the first critic to study the imagination. Nature of imagination examines its role in creative activity. While most of the critics use fancy and imagination almost as synonyms, Coleridge distincts itself to define the respective role, and Coleridge is the first to difference between fancy and imagination. Most of the artists use fancy and imagination are same. But Coleridge delivered the biographical trivia without a second thought of whether or not there will not be any disagreement from his audience. He does not cater to one audience, he just experiences his thought. Coleridge's treatment of the subject chapter characterized greater depth, fantasy, and philosophical subtlety in his unique contribution to literary theory.